In 1965, we laid out a garden in front of our house on Leros. We planted trees, shrubs, and flowers, all selected with utmost care. There were orange trees, laurel, magnolia, mimosa, bougainvillea, hibiscus, roses, geraniums, and many others. But what happened? After 25 years, all the roses have died away, and the orange trees are stunted. They never did bear fruit because the place is too dry and windswept. Instead, the wind or the birds of the air have brought to the garden two beautiful almond trees, a wild pear, hanging caper bushes, and clover that blooms exuberantly in the spring. It crosses my mind that the same thing has happened to my life. I tried to plan, to decide for myself what I would do with it. I studied the history of art, intending to be a university professor. Within the narrow confines of my own cultural background as a Swedish-speaking Finn, I intended to write fiction. But what happened? I became a yachtsman, roving the Mediterranean, a journalist and author of international travel books. So it is that we build up and plan small gardens, only to realize gradually that these plots of land are parts of a larger world. My life has become an interaction between my dream of the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean that surrounds me in reality. He is Goran Schild, born 1917. Writer, Doctor of Philosophy, published his first book in 1943. His travel books have been translated into many languages. His most recent book is a biography of the distinguished Finnish architect Alvar Aalto. My first book, the first volume to come to my library, was called The Gallows Man, and bore this dedication: to my dear colleague from father, Ruhela, August the 8th, 1924. I was 7 years old when I received The Gallows Man, and my father was 36. It was just a year before his death. I do not know what it was that had already elevated me to the level fellow author or colleague. Perhaps it was because he had confided in me a great secret the previous summer, that he had completed his manuscript, The Chevalier of Fortune, and for fear of fire had hidden it in the outhouse loft. Only he and I knew where it was. I already had my own desk at that time, a large packing case just outside his study, near the door. I was busily engaged in writing a drama called The Big Fire. After all, Father had written a book called The Big Roll. Our professional camaraderie was sealed by a fraternal look we gave each other every time we met. This took the form of the most serious expression we could muster. The work of a writer is, after all, no light matter, and calls for the understanding encouragement of fellow professionals. In my youth, I encountered two paradises. The first was as a boy, sailing in the Finnish archipelagos aboard a little centerboard yacht, the Vita Nova. The second was France, Italy, the Mediterranean. The whole world that opened up before me when, as a 17-year-old student, I traveled abroad for the first time. The best thing would surely be to combine these two paradises, the joy of sailing in the south, into a single, even more exhilarating experience. During the war years, spent at the front, and the anxious months at the military hospital, this dream of sheer joy, of sailing to the Mediterranean, grew into a compelling fixation. If I ever get out of this alive, I thought, nothing will prevent me from fulfilling my dream. And so it happened that in 1946, a small legacy from my grandmother enabled me to change out my old double-ender, the Liberté, for a splendid little motor yacht, the Daphne. The following year, I was able to embark on the voyage from the colorful bays of Finland over the North Sea, continuing through the canals of France. I dreamed on my dream of the Mediterranean as I traversed the adventurous waters of reality. At 4 o'clock, when the sky had already paled, I made a last attempt with the sextant, having screwed on the large telescopic sight to strengthen the star's luminosity. And now it worked. The pole star lay there on the thin thread of the dawn horizon, like a gleaming drop of dew. It gave a sure bearing, according to which we were due west of Kefalonia's North Cape. It had taken Daphne 4 days to sail across the shoreless sea, not 17 days as it had taken Odysseus, until we, as he had done, descried the shadowy mountain like a shield on the airy blue expanse of the sea. This arrival in Greece at sunrise, this first meeting with the bare mountains we had heard so much about, this meeting between Apollo's land and our northern Daphne, which had borne us all the way from Finland's fur-clad inlets and Sweden's skerries, this moment was so unexpectedly moving, so overwhelming, that our tired eyes filled with tears. The vision of antiquity as a lost golden age, the myth of the ancient Greeks as the wise, aristocratic and democratic administrators of the true art of living, emerged during the Renaissance and particularly flourished during the 18th century. A basic premise in maintaining such views is ignorance of what antiquity really was like. During the 18th and 19th centuries, few people visited Greece. The fallacy was based on a handful of literary works such as the Odyssey and the ancient tragedies, a few temples and some mutilated sculpture. The remarkable thing is that this vision of antiquity persisted, despite all that archaeology and historical research and time revealed about the underlying truth. I can myself witness that during the first 20 years of our time there, Greece was still retaining, almost untarnished, the halo that the humanists of Europe had appropriated the country in the course of 500 years. It took very little to transport us literally into the Garden of Eden.